The United States was growing rapidly in the 19th century. Railroads began to grow as a result of the expanding industry, in particular in the Northeast. Established cities such as Philadelphia became intertwined with rapidly redefined metropolises such as New York City. This economic boom led to both increased freight traffic for railroads as well as the rise of commuter services. The surrounding towns and suburbs of New York and Philadelphia saw a population increase in the latter half of the 19th century as commuter lines were established. People now living outside of the city could travel to and from work. In addition to the working and middle classes commuting, many of the upper class used these lines to escape the hustle and bustle of city life to the various beaches of New Jersey. Northern and central New Jersey had traditionally contained a majority of the population of the state, with good farmland and early industrial development such as the mills in Paterson. Southern New Jersey lacked the large population centers of the north, and with the rise of rail in the state, the distance between the southern beaches and the cities of the Northeast was cut almost in half. With improved travel times, areas that had previously been small and inhabited mainly by maritime communities were transformed into resort towns by the northeastern elite. Brand new towns were planned and constructed, such as Asbury Park along the central Jersey shoreline, and larger developments such as Atlantic City and Wildwood to the south. These new shore towns built long wooden promenades, known as boardwalks, as well as amusements in the form of rides and games. Many of the towns and cities were created in the vision of Protestant religious figures like James Bradley as playgrounds for the pious. As a result, most of these towns were dry, meaning the sale and public consumption of alcohol was prohibited. The exception to this was Atlantic City. What is now known as Atlantic City was established in 1850 by a group of businessmen led by Dr. Jonathan Pitney for the explicit purpose of building a resort. Pitney promoted the salt air and ocean for the alleged healing properties, therefore suggesting that summertime visits were beneficial to one's health. Pitney's pitch was ultimately a success, as the city was able to secure investment from one of the largest roads in the Northeast, the Pennsylvania Railroad. The Pennsylvania Railroad, or the PRR, was considered to be at its peak the standard railroad of the world. The PRR invested roughly $1.2 million to construct a railroad that would connect Philadelphia to the newly named Atlantic City via Camden. This early railroad would become known as the Camden and Atlantic City Railroad. With the rise of Atlantic City in the late 19th century, tourism became a huge industry for the Jersey Shore. The PRR began to expand further to meet demand, eventually consolidating their southern New Jersey routes into the West Jersey and Seashore Railroad in 1896. While the PRR operated a majority of the southern New Jersey rail lines, competition was on the horizon. The rail connections of the city of Philadelphia were primarily divided among two roads, the PRR and the Reading. Initially founded as the Philadelphia and Reading Railroad, the Reading Railroad connected the city of Reading, Pennsylvania, to the hub of Philadelphia. The distances between the two cities are approximately 60 miles. Both the Reading and PRR ran rail in and out of Philadelphia, often in redundancy, as the two roads connected many of the same cities along parallel routes. The Reading Railroad would eventually come to financially control the Central Railroad of New Jersey in 1901, absorbing many lines in the state. While the Reading did not control as much of the South Jersey market, 3 years after the formation of the W, and S, the Reading Railroad formed their share of the Southern New Jersey network into the Atlantic City Railroad. The two companies ran competing express passenger services between the hubs of New York City and Philadelphia to Atlantic City. Most famously, the Blue Comet, operated by the Central Railroad of New Jersey under Reading ownership, connected New York via ferry to Jersey City and then Atlantic City. The PRR ran a competing express train, the Nellie Bly, direct out of New York City into Atlantic City. Similar express trains ran directly out of Philadelphia into various New Jersey Shore destinations. Competition on the rival lines was clearly visible. In fact, trains seemingly raced one another and was encouraged by the fact that in many areas, the two lines were only several hundred feet apart. On the Cape May lines, the trains were in sight of each other for the 11 miles between Cape May Courthouse and Cape May. Over the last 5 miles into Cape May proper, the tracks were only 50 feet apart. Business on both the Reading as well as the PRR lines into South Jersey peaked in the early 1920s. The completion of the Ben Franklin Bridge in 1926, as well as the construction of state roads in the late 1920s, led to a decrease in rail traffic. Eventually, the state of New Jersey stepped in, and on March 4, 1931, the New Jersey Board of Public Utilities, BPU, ordered that the two companies join their southern New Jersey lines into one company. The Consolidation Agreement decreed that the Pennsylvania Railroad had 2/3 ownership and that the Reading Company had 1/3 ownership, as the PRR owned a majority of the lines in South Jersey. This new merger would be known as the Pennsylvania Reading Seashore Lines, sometimes abbreviated as the PRSL. Unlike the later Penn Central merger, the PRR and Reading remained independent and in competition throughout the Mid-Atlantic region. The PRSL would be one of the only examples in the U.S. where two competing railroads operated a part of their respective networks together. Despite its relatively small size compared to both parent companies, the PRSL did roster its own fleet of motive power. Following the 1931 merger, the PRSL operated 21 of its own steam engines. The fleet consisted of former WJ&S steam engines built to PRR standard designs, such as the B6B040 for rail yard switching, the E6442 Atlantic type steam engine for passenger service, and the H10280 Consolidation type for freight service. The PRSL leased all of its passenger stock from the PRR directly through their subsidiary, the WJ&S. The PRSL operated Pennsylvania Railroad built P70 passenger cars, as well as B60 baggage cars painted in Tuscan red and lettered for the Seashore lines. While the majority of the early PRSL motive power was steam, a small portion of the network had been electrified. The Millville line had been electrified, connecting the hub city of Camden to towns such as Millville and Woodbury with their electrified service terminating in Newfield. The line had been electrified in the early 1900s with both overhead catenary as well as third rail. Initially, the system was intended to be entirely overhead catenary, but local ordinance in some towns along the line prohibited the construction of overhead wire. For these sections of the line, third rail electrification was used. Prior to the merger, the formerly WJ&S operated the Millville line with proprietary interurban stock. However, following the merger, the PRSL used Pennsylvania Railroad-built MP54 EMU electric multiple unit sets. These made for some of the most unique pieces of equipment across the entire system. The first order of these MP54s were completed in 1908 and were constructed for commuter service into New York Penn Station. In PRR service, they were entirely built to be powered with overhead catenary. Third rail MP54s were used exclusively on the PRR subsidiary, the Long Island Railroad, with third rail DC variants entering service in 1915. What made the PRSL MP54s so unique was the fact that they were equipped with both pantographs as well as third rail shoes, meaning they could operate under wire as well as in third rail service. Only 18 of this type of MP54 were constructed, solely to be operated on this line. Following the merger in 1931, the PRSL built a new terminal station opened in Atlantic City in 1934. This Union Station was built in a modified classical style with some Art Deco influence. This station served PRSL trains from Philadelphia, as well as C&J trains, a railroad that the Reading had a controlling share of, from Jersey City. This station would remain in operation until 1967, before being converted into a bus terminal and later demolished in 1997. Traffic on the line was seasonal. While freight traffic on the PRSL was fairly consistent, passenger service peaked in the summer, with less use in the winter months. For this reason, the PRSL was not immune to financial struggle. The railroad remained profitable in the 1930s, as well as the early 1940s. However, the post-war shift within the United States to car use heavily impacted the amount of beachgoers using the PRSL. The Interstate Highway Act of 1956 saw the construction of vast networks of roads across the nation. Within the state of New Jersey, construction of the Garden State Parkway connecting the northern edge of the state all the way to Cape May along the coastline drastically affected all railroad commuter operations in the state. The later construction of the Atlantic City Expressway in 1964 further cut into the PRSL summer market, with now a major highway connecting both New York as well as Philadelphia direct to Atlantic City as well as other seashore destinations. With this loss in passenger traffic, the PRSL was forced to adapt. The 1950s saw a drastic restructuring of the PRSL. As the PRR and Reading both began to withdraw larger steam motive power from their rosters, Many of the larger 462 Pacific steam engines lived their autumn years serving on the PRSL. Pennsylvania Railroad K4s as well as Reading G3 Pacifics served on the PRSL until the end of steam operations in the late 1950s. With a drop in passenger service, the PRSL opted to move away from larger passenger trains in favor of smaller diesel multiple unit sets. The PRSL was one of the first railroads in the country to purchase the rail diesel cars, or RDCs, from the Philadelphia-based Budd Company. These cars were powered with bus engines and could be operated as either a single unit or a multiple car set. This flexibility allowed for the PRSL to economize their passenger operations, especially on the lower traffic portions of the network. As the PRSL began to phase out steam in the late 1940s and early 1950s, the railroad bought 32 diesel locomotives from another Philadelphia-based company, the Baldwin Locomotive Works. The primary types purchased were the AS-16s for passenger service, as well as the S-12s for freight service. By the end of the 1960s, the reliability of Baldwin locomotives was beginning to wane, as they consistently had mechanical issues. Baldwin had merged with Lima and Hamilton in the 1950s and was going bankrupt by the end of the 1960s. Forced to look elsewhere, the PRSL went with EMD, or the Electric Motive Division of General Motors. The PRSL would be one of the first railroads to adopt the now common GP38 diesel locomotives for freight operations. The railroad placed an order for 15 of the type starting in 1967, numbered 2000 to 2014. Much like other railroads in the northeastern United States, the PRSL was facing financial troubles. The PRSL's passenger business was dying, with many of the low-traffic branches drying up by the 1970s. Freight traffic had previously consisted of mixed goods trains bringing consumer goods from industrial centers to the outlying coastal communities. One major freight customer in particular provided a steady source of income for the PRSL. The B.L. England power plant, constructed in 1961, located near Ocean City in Upper Township, required several deliveries of 90-car coal hoppers once a week, which kept the struggling railroad afloat through the 1960s and 1970s. The construction of the Patco Speed Line, under the Urban Mass Transit Act of 1965, absorbed the PRSL right-of-way into Camden, running east towards Lindenwold. See Alan Fisher's video for more information. With this acquisition, the PRSL traffic was rerouted over the Del Air Bridge into Philadelphia. The PRR was eventually merged with longtime rival New York Central to form the Penn Central Company in 1968. The PRSL continued operations after the creation of Penn Central up until 1976, when Penn Central, along with several other struggling northeastern roads, to include the Reading, were formed into the Consolidated Rail Corporation, better known as Conrail. With the creation of Conrail, the corporation assumed control of both freight and passenger transportation, with Conrail giving control of the passenger operations to the New Jersey Department of Transportation, which would eventually be reformed into NJ Transit. Today, much of the former PRSL network has since been abandoned. What is left of the main line between Philadelphia and Atlantic City has since been formed into the Atlantic City line under NJ Transit. Briefly, Amtrak operated a service to Atlantic City between 1989 and 1995. Since 1995, the line has been under the control of NJ Transit. The Atlantic City line is the only remaining commuter service on the former PRSL. Several short lines operate portions of the network, such as the Winchester and Western, Southern Railroad of New Jersey, as well as two short lines that operate both freight and excursion passenger service, SMS Rail and Cape May Seashore lines. Much of the PRSL's equipment survives on the latter, such as a few GP38s, RDCs, as well as P70 coaches. Much of the southern portion of the Cape May branch is out of service, now being used for railbike tours operated by Revolution Rail. Almost all of the trackage to the barrier island destinations such as Wildwood and Ocean City has been removed, with only the trackage to the former BL England plant remaining. While the network is not as robust as it was in its peak, there is still potential for future commuter services as the state of New Jersey retains ownership of much of the former PRSL.